One piece of advice that I've heard growing up is that when you don't know what to become, work towards what you wanted to be when you were young. While I don't really know how I would perform in the real world of controlling railway vehicles, through video game simulations I've been able to live out my dream job for, at this point, about 200 hours. Derail Valley is a train simulator where you play the role of a train operator on the Derail Valley Railway. While the atmosphere at the moment is a bit lonely and a bit eerie at times, being the only operator seemingly on this massive railway, jobs are procedurally generated at each of the multitude of industries and towns. The goal of the game is to simply pick a job of your liking and complete it for a wad of bills. If you do an especially quick job, you'll even get a small to very large bonus depending on the job. Jobs range from simply transporting a variety of goods, shunting/switching containers in preparation or as a result of a delivery, and logistically moving containers to their proper destination. Using the money earned from these jobs is how one is able to acquire more licenses. From the start of the game, you don't get access to every single locomotive in a regular campaign. While you may see other engines parked on the sidings, without the proper license, they're just pretty set pieces. Licenses can almost be obtained in any order one chooses. The only exceptions are licenses that require a sequential order of prerequisites. Be warned, however, that owning more licenses shows that you are steadily progressing as an operator, and simply buying the access to do certain jobs and drive stronger locomotives will not only increase your copay, but this would also reduce the time in order to get that sweet bonus pay. For those unsure what a copay means in this instance, the railway does have insurance for when an accident may happen. And believe you me, even to the most experienced players, accidents will happen. So paying up to the copay amount will have the insurance pay off any remaining cost, meaning the higher your copay, the more you're going to need to pay out of pocket in case anything were to happen as you progress your career. While this has starting operators be able to make more mistakes, down the line more care will need to be taken as too much fee debt will prevent jobs from being authorized. With that info out of the way, let's overview the currently 8 drivable locomotives as of build 99, starting off with the DE2 shunter. The DE2 is a very small locomotive that the player is given access to once they complete the tutorial, or skip it. Taking the name into consideration, the DE2 uses a diesel engine to power an electric generator which provides power to the traction motors behind each of the 2 axles. Being made for shunting/switching, the DE2 has a lot of tractive effort while on flat ground for its size. Being able to shunt consists of over 1,000 tons at their best, given the job would have it struggle a fair amount. Because of how electric traction motors work, both diesel-electric locomotives have to be put to a complete stop in order to switch directions, lest they cook their traction motors, which is shown with a bright flash of light accompanied by a small electrical explosion that then requires the traction motor to be reset via the breaker panel. Another quirk of the DE2 is how their cooling system works, or rather how they don't have an active cooling system. The traction motors rely on passive cooling, meaning that they will operate at a safer and cooler temperature while under load if they are going at an appropriate speed. So while transporting a light load at high speeds, you won't need to worry about overheating, but the second you're moving something over 400 or so tons up a hill, the DE2 will quickly go down the heat death spiral, where you lower the throttle to reduce the heat, but as of a result of reducing the throttle you will go slower, which makes the motors accumulate more heat, which has you reduce the throttle again, and so on until you start eventually rolling downhill. Going down the list of engines by cheapest license to the most expensive has us overviewing the S060 steam shunter next. While the S060 has a comparatively cheap license fee of 20k, there are some hidden extras that need to be accounted for before being able to successfully operate the steam engines. In order to operate either steam engine, the player would have to have purchased a shovel, a lighter, and as of B99, an oiler. Being released in B95, the steam shunter is meant to be an introduction to operating steam engines as a whole. This locomotive has 6 driving wheels with no leading or trailing wheels, giving it the name of the S060. There is a setup process that is a bit more involved than just flipping a couple of breaker switches in order to get us ready. First things first, we need to flip the articulation points with oil using the oiler. The oiler itself does not have a real amount of liquid in it, but it essentially has an infinite amount of oil in the container. Then we go to the lubricator, where we turn it a good amount of times until the right valve is filled with oil. Not doing these first steps will result in the locomotive not only creating the worst noise in the game while it moves, but this will also start incurring damage. Afterwards, return the air compressor to the left to activate it. The much older locomotives on the railway use what is called a non-self-lapping brake, which means that the actual brake lever does not directly control how much of the brake is applied. The newer diesel locomotives like the DH4 and DE6 have what is known as a dynamic brake. The DM3 has both types of brakes, but its brake engine, compression release brake, serves as a dynamic brake with the train brake being non-self-lapping. A good tip that I could give when it comes to non-self-lapping brakes is remembering that fully applying the brakes is only for emergencies. This is done by moving the lever all the way forward. While this will incur wear on the brakes and wheels, doing so will stop the train the fastest. However, you will need to wait for the compressor to fully restore air pressure before being able to use the hold function of the brakes. In my experience game-wise, the best results are applying a very slight brake in order to retain as much speed as possible while also slowing down. Steam engines are not great at getting the entire load moving quickly after a full stop, and the S060 is already heavily limited by their range. Simply adding about a bar of pressure is enough to start slowing down a consist. A bit more than 1 bar, about 1.25 to 1.5 bars, is good for slowing down a train a bit faster, and 2 bars will bring a train down to a smooth enough stop. If going downhill, a range of between 1 to 1.5 bars will keep you in control of your descent in most cases. Optionally, on top of the engine's boiler is the dynamo. Using steam pressure, the dynamo will generate an electric current that can power the headlights, the cab lights, and any extra gadgets that may have been installed. While useful, I keep this off when I have no gadgets and it's daytime, as the constant whining noise it makes annoys me. While not entirely sure on its historical or current day accuracy, I'm hoping that in the future we could have some sort of battery upgrade to power the lights and gadgets, and that battery would either use solar or small durations of the dynamo for recharging. That would be nice. Now in the cab, our dual role of a fireman and driver has us doing double duty on not only ensuring the steam engine does not explode, but that we also get to our destination without flying off the rails. Using the shovel, we get the firebox filled with coal, having ignited with the lighter, and then we monitor our steam pressure and water boiler gauge. Usually from a cold start, if you want to speed up the process of accumulating steam pressure, have the dampener to the right of the firebox all the way up. There's also the blower, which stokes the flames to burn even hotter for even faster pressure buildup, but this will use up more coal and water. To the top left of the valves and gears is the water release valve. Turning it all the way to the left will release a lot of water, and just a segment or two will release the least amount. While idle, I tend to have this completely closed if the water gauge is at least around half full. While running, I usually have it at a 1 to 2 tick turn to the left, with 3 or more depending on the extent of the incline/decline, the load, and my current speed. Maintaining constant knowledge on the water level using the water gauge is key to not only preventing a boiler explosion, but also is a factor in how much the water valve should be releasing at a given moment. While it's bad to overfill the boiler with water, it's even worse to let it empty, as that's a surefire way of knowing what the inside of a steam engine looks like. But do note that sometimes this gauge will not be totally accurate, as the simple movement up or downhill will have it inaccurately portray the water level. When going uphill, the water gauge will note a higher water level as the water is moved all the way to the back of the boiler. When going downhill, the water gauge will note a lower level as the water recedes from the back. This simple movement of water because of gravity is how a lot of accidental boiler explosions would happen back in the day. But as far as I know, I don't know if there's any ground sheet damage simulation in the game that would also have this happen. So TLDR, don't let the boiler level be empty for too long. Here's what I do when it comes to a steam train operation. I usually build enough pressure to have about 9 bars in a boiler. I then lower the dampener to about a tick or 2 from above the bottom. This keeps the fire hot enough to resume building pressure, but not enough to pop the safety valve, which is about 14 bars and up. Thanks to the presence of the safety valve, as far as I know, it is impossible to blow up the steam engine by building up too much steam pressure in the boiler. But if you hear the safety valve go off, that's excess steam being released, and to that same extent, that is wasted steam. Again, the S060's Achilles heel is its horrible range. You will run out of water way before you run out of coal in either steam engines, but the smaller water tanks of the 060 will quickly empty if you're not mindful of the water valve's current state. While running, I feel I could be the most efficient if I aim to be around 11 bars of pressure. If I get around 11 bars of pressure and I don't need to worry about going uphill, I simply just lower the dampener all the way to the bottom and have the water valve at one tick or even closed if there's just a lot of water in the boiler. If the load is extremely heavy or I need to go uphill, 12 bar works just fine. Although sometimes you will need everything you can get, and hearing the safety valves go off is just a part of the journey. The key thing to keep in mind is that the two halves of the steam locomotive require a balance. Adding water will not only keep things from exploding, but it will also lower the temperature and overall boiler pressure. Adding more coal, raising the dampener, opening the throttle while running, and loosening the blower valve will increase the temperature and pressure of the boiler. Now, to begin moving, we simply move the Johnson bar/cutoff all the way forward or backwards and then release a bit of steam to the chest by moving the throttle. There is a gauge that shows the chest pressure, and having about 3 bars in there will begin movement. Keep an eye when starting to move heavier loads or while trying to get started in the rain, as the steam engines will start grinding away at their wheels if there's too much pressure in the chest. Also keep an eye on the color of the smoke coming out of the funnel of the engines, as that is a good indicator of how efficiently the train is running. Aim to get gray to white smoke and avoid dark black smoke, as that indicates the incomplete burning of coal. When going full beans, you will notice that cinders will jump out of the funnel. Apparently, these sparks can set some flammable loads ablaze. However, I do not know how this affects hazardous cargo. While moving, the goal will be to pull the cutoff towards the middle to increase coal efficiency at the cost of torque. Rain is not only your arch nemesis throughout your career in Derail Valley, it is also the arch nemesis of every locomotive's tractive effort. I feel that rain is especially harsh on the steam engines. Even with sand being applied to the rails, you will be hearing or seeing those wheels spinning in vain. Getting a consist moving forward at a decent speed takes about 8 or so bars to get started, but in the rain the wheels will start slipping if the pressure goes above 6 bars. My best advice is to incrementally increase the chest pressure by using the throttle and keep it around 4 to 5 bars. Just barely enough to start moving, but just barely not enough to wheel slip. Using this technique of slowly applying chest pressure is also a good way of operating the steam engines at a lower speed when trying to refill on water and coal. The railway has coal and water stations fitted in most locations, but they're more fitted for the much larger steam engine, as lining up the arm for water and the chute for the coal bunker is a real chore with the teeny little 060. When I'm having trouble lining up either engine, I usually just open the cylinder cocks, which is what you open when you hear a sloshing sound while moving, and apply a bit of independent brakes in order to finally control the amount of movement. It is possible to use a technique called counter steaming in order to brake in emergencies, but as of B99, that is largely not recommended as it causes damage upon every wheel rotation. But at the same time, B99's pressure rework has made that so steam engines punch a lot higher than before. I've been able to go much faster than the speed gauge can show on the S060 with little effort, and with enough space, move much heavier loads up hills that otherwise would not have been possible before. Also introduced for a future survival mechanic in the game, and as an extra drop of realism, both steam engines will simulate a non-failure related blowback when going through a tunnel if the firebox is left open. While it does not do anything to our player character at the moment, this blowback phenomena in real life can be an extremely dangerous incident that has seriously burned and killed crew. At 30k for the license, the DM3 is one of 2 mechanical locomotives as of B99. Introduced in B93, also known as the Simulator Update, the DM3 is a diesel mechanical locomotive with 3 powered axles. Outside of steam engines, I feel that people view this engine as the most difficult train to operate due to its fully mechanical nature, which from a first impression I understand. The DM3 has 2 gearboxes that need to be moved in different positions depending on the locomotive's current speed. For those that are still learning, there is a diagram right under the gearboxes that show all of the gears positions. Now, unlike cars with manual transmissions, the DM3 does not have a clutch to safely change gears, so always remember to keep the throttle all the way up or off when switching gears, otherwise you will hear a hard crunching noise as you swap gears. Money shifting is indeed a thing that exists, and if you're not careful you will blow up the gearbox in spectacular fashion. Now, this is how I learned how to memorize the gears. From the get-go, 1-1 has the most power, but is the slowest gear. You go then from 1-2, 2-1, 2-2, 3-1, 3-2, 2-3, and then at max gear 3-3. There is an RPM gauge on the DM3's dashboard that is crucial to look at while moving up gears. You can move up gears whenever the line is above the halfway mark, but as long as the shift is done with the throttle closed and before redlining, you'll prevent the gearbox from sustaining damage. Downshifting can be pretty dangerous, but usually going down a single gear when the gauge is under half will be around the safe zone in the previous gear. Also notice that even without the throttle engaged, if you have all the brakes off, the DM3 will creep either forwards or backwards. This can be pretty useful for shunting more fragile cargo. In general, the DM3 is excellent for shunting due to its lower top speed and ridiculous amount of strength. The top speed in 1-1 is about 10 km per hour at the most. Keep in mind that the best recommended speed for coupling up non-fragile cargo is about 6 km per hour, with 4 to 5 for the more fragile loads. While the gearbox does allow more control over speed, it is also the DM3's biggest limitation, as the train's top speed is a quite low 67 km per hour. Rather, I shouldn't say top speed, as the DM3 can go faster. It's just that going any faster than that will redline the highest gear and cause damage at best, a gearbox explosion at worst. So going downhill for the DM3 can be a very dangerous endeavor if you let the train go out of control. Do be wary, as hard braking and impacts will cause the DM3's engine to stall. This would require restarting the engine again, but the DM3 feels a lot more prone to stalling than any of the locomotives, especially so in the rain when the DM3 wheel slips. Also introduced in the simulator update, the DH4 is what I have dubbed the luxury diesel. The DH4 is the only diesel hydraulic engine as of B99 and has 4 powered axles. In terms of strength and range, this engine is pretty middle of the road. While weaker than the DM3, the DH4 will outspeed and outclass the DE2, the DM3, and the S060 in medium to heavy shunting and medium freight loads. Being a diesel hydraulic, it uses a diesel inline 8 turbocharged engine connected to the train's wheels, where through torque converters the DH4 will automatically change gears based on speed and throttle level. However, due to this transfer medium, oil, being used, the higher RPM the motor is going at, the more heat will be generated. Because of the high heat buildup, the DH4 has an active cooling solution that will turn on before hitting the yellow line on the heat gauge. When the cooler is active, you will hear the fans activate and a blue light will turn on the dashboard. However, this active cooling solution is not strong enough to sustain the DH4 when going on max throttle for very long, and heavier loads will not allow the DH4 to accelerate quickly due to its automatic nature. You can visually see the DH4 overheating, as once it redlines, there will be smoke emanating from the front of the engine. The DH4 is one of 2 locomotives to have a dynamic brake, which in the DH4 uses its own torque converter as a fluid brake. While very effective, the dynamic brake will also create a lot of heat very quickly. I call the DH4 the luxury diesel due to how it is the least fuel efficient locomotive and highest cost maintenance wise in the entire game. But it is also the most comfortable engine to operate. Using the DH4 for jobs is also quite expensive for what it brings to the table freight wise. For shunting, it's quite the workhorse, being able to assemble extremely heavy loads for much more capable locomotives. Alongside the DE2, the DH4 is also controllable externally via a remote control, which is a must for shunting work. With the DH4, you can effectively always have 2 jobs set whenever doing a freight delivery, as you can just very quickly whip out the remote and get ready to do a shunting job with what you just delivered. At $50,000, the same price as the DH4's license, you can also purchase the license to drive the larger and much more powerful steam engine. The S282 is a steam engine that has 2 leading wheels, 8 powerful driving wheels, and 2 trailing wheels in the end. This particular train is treated as having 2 parts, S282A referring to the main locomotive, with S282B referring to the tender that accompanies it. Starting up the locomotive is the same as the tank engine. However, do note that the tender has a handbrake, and if uncoupled from the main locomotive somehow, the A unit cannot use the air brakes. Coupling the tender just requires moving that main locomotive backwards into it, and then it'll just auto-couple up. Nearly outmatching the most powerful diesel in the game, the S282 is meant for extremely heavy workloads of over 1,000 tons. Plus, with the steam chest rework, the S282 is also the fastest train in the game, easily able to go nearly 120 km per hour on the longer sections of the railway. For its immense power, however, visibility is extremely lower now there is a long boiler in front and a tender behind the engine. While playing in VR, you really do need to lean out of the cab window, or in my case, just hop on top of the engine's roof or tender to look around. But if you're using the S282 after using the 060, you're going to really notice the massive difference in range, as with the tender, the S282 has multitudes much more water and coal than the teeny tank engine. However, unlike the S060, the S282 does not have a cab light. The dynamo will only power by default the front or back lights and the gear light, which allows the driver to look down towards the valve gear to visually spot wheel slip. Being the third most expensive license in the game so far, the DE6 is the most powerful and expensive to run locomotive in the game as of B99. Being a diesel-electric with 6 powered axles, the DE6 is essentially a DE2 on steroids. Its weak point, however, is its shunting potential, as while very powerful, the reduction in visibility makes it harder to judge how fast you're going when setting up a consist. Unlike the DE2 and the DH4, the DE6 cannot be controlled with the remote, but there is a workaround using the multi-unit cable. By using the MU cable to hook up to a locomotive that is compatible with the remote, you can simply use that locomotive as an antenna. Be wary of having the antenna engine powered, as the differing traction and power distribution can prove an issue. While not the fastest engine anymore due to the steam chest rework, the DE6 is still very speedy. Although because of its traction motors, it has a hard limit of about 120 km per hour before the TMs will explode in spectacular fashion. Like the DH4, the DE6 has a dynamic brake that turns the traction motors into generators. The faster the locomotive is moving with the dynamic brake on, the greater the effect with the traction motors turning the rotation into electricity that also generates an amount of heat. Unlike the DH4, the DE6 does not need to worry about overheating while using the dynamic brakes, as any heat is dissipated into the atmosphere as it is created. Also, unlike the DH4, the DE6 has active cooling that is always on. Using the dynamic brakes in either the DH4 or DE6 is incredibly useful, as it negates the overheating of the brake shoes of the train. While brake shoe durability for rolling stock outside of the trains is not a factor in Derail Valley at the moment, when they ultimately overheat from being used for extended durations, they will quickly lose effectiveness for a set period of time. There are 2 locomotives that are locked away in 2 separate sheds on the railway. The first is the BE2, unlocked using Bob's garage key for 30k. The BE2 is a battery-powered electric locomotive that has 2 powered axles. Introduced in B98, it is the first EV, and while not very powerful, it is good at towing engines in need of repair and being the last resort for pushing a consist, as it could be spawned using the comms radio, alongside anything that is found in the sheds for a fee. It is unadvised to tow the BE2 as the traction motor cannot sustain speeds higher than 30 km per hour without taking damage, with 45 km an hour incurring fatal damage to the drivetrain. The other locomotive that is locked away in a shed is the DM1U utility rail vehicle. It is a 2-axle diesel mechanical light transporter locomotive that is a chopped-up rail bus fitted with a bed for transporting locomotive parts. Being tied to B99's museum update, the main purpose of the DM1U is being a part of the refurbishment and repair of the demonstrator locomotives. Because of how it essentially light rails everywhere, it is a very fast locomotive, easily able to go over 100 km per hour. However, do note that the DM1U has the smallest fuel tank in the game and is driven via the front axle, which can easily lose traction if hauling/towing anything heavier than a locomotive. Using the gears is similar to the DM3, but the gears are nicely laid out on the dashboard for ease of use. There's also no clutch on the DM1U, so gear swapping requires the throttle to be entirely off. While in gear, the locomotive can do a creep, and staying in gear will eventually slow down the train while in motion.
There is a neutral position that can be set for easy coasting down the lines.
The other two pieces of rolling stock can be unlocked via the sheds is the caboose, which has the main function of having a handbrake that cannot overheat. It also has an onboard career manager, remote controller and flashlight charging station, while also boosting the controller's range by about 2 kilometers. Introduced in the simulator update, the caboose can be unlocked by purchasing Reginald's garage key, and only one caboose can exist on the railway at a single time. The final unlock via a shed is the DE6 Slug. Being only compatible with the DE2 and DE6, the Slug is essentially just a DE6 frame with just the traction motors fitted. When connected with the MU cable, the Slug provides extra pulling power for the locomotive at the cost of lowering top speed. It can only be coupled up to a single engine at a time and can essentially increase the main locomotive's tolerance towards wheel slip. Using a Slug with the DE6 will increase its hauling strength to about 1,550 tons, with two DE6s about 3,300 tons. The Slug can be obtained by purchasing Steve's garage key. The shed resides on the steepest portion of the railway, which is home to the rare 10 km/h speed limit. One last bit of rolling stock before moving on. From the start of the game, the player can request a handcart at no cost using the comms radio, mainly intended for transportation between stations if you don't have access to teleportation or want to pay for fast travel. I took the liberty of focusing this review on the locomotives, as driving these 8 trains is what makes Derail Valley such a fun experience. You really feel the sway and power of these engines as they blitz past signs and the like. I find myself readjusting my stance when playing in VR when operating the steam locomotives pretty frequently, as when the train starts swaying, it's really hard not to get immersed while doing jobs on the railway. Growing up, I found out about other train sims like Train Z and the like, but I never had a capable gaming computer until my later years of high school and college. But by then, I had largely fallen out of my love for trains, so I never gave them a chance. As of the past couple years, due to COVID, I had regained my interest in trains through mod repair and review channels like Double O Bill, Eric, and Sam's Trains. And before I knew it, I came across this early access game called Derail Valley. It is quite expensive for an early access game, but after dedicating about 200 hours into it, 80 from just my recent stream playthrough, I can say the price is well worth it for such a quality product. The game is not perfect, of course, being based on Unity. The game is not super optimized for VR and eats up all 12 gigs of VRAM on my 4070 Ti as if it were candy. Although, thinking about it, this could be partially due to using the third eye mod, which grants an extra POV for making streaming/recording easier for the viewer. I really do feel my FPS fall around 40ish while at the harbor, but even then the game works like a charm. On the other hand, the minimum specs for running on desktop mode is quite reasonable. The game even works quite well on the Steam Deck. With the settings dialed in with everything on low or lowest, the game will run at an almost always steady 60 FPS. Besides the small text in the alt menu, the game is perfectly playable without any issue. If I can handle driving a Steam engine on a Steam Deck, then this could be a perfectly serviceable way of experiencing the Derail Valley in all its glory and perils. Let's also not forget to mention that there is an active roadmap for the future of Derail Valley, with the next free update promising to add more locomotives, locations, improving the simulations, providing documentation for mods, and a Steam Workshop, just to name a couple. Speaking of the modding scene, there are some impressive mods that I will continue to monitor as time progresses, like the online co-op mod, custom maps like Forgotten Tracks, and any and all custom locos or ways to customize the locomotives like the Rearrange S282 mod. To end things off, I'll be providing some extra tips and tricks that I learned during my 200 hours of playtime. First things first, a good and easy way of avoiding paying for the multi-unit license while being able to use 2 locomotives easily is just by buying the remote control. Having that paired to the train behind the head will give easy access for the starting out DE2 to last just a little while longer before you can get your next license. Using this remote with the DE2 or DH4 is also a great way of distributing power for heavier loads up hills, although do take care with longer consists, as without spawning in a caboose, you will have reception issues at a certain point. Using the remote also makes shunting work extremely easy thanks to its couple and uncouple function. As long as the car is at least halfway past the sign, it should count that the cargo/container is stationed there. Plus, remember that uncoupling auto sets the handbrake on the controller or locomotive left behind. You can save a good deal of money by sticking to steam engines, and by getting better at them you will only save more money over using the diesels. If you get comfortable or crazy enough with the S282, double heading is an easy way of getting a monstrous amount of power without getting the high running fees of diesels. However, this will prove an easy way of slacking in terms of efficiency. In general, a good thing to remember is that while steam is hard to run, it's cheap to operate, while the opposite is true for the diesels. In the mid to late game, when your bonus times are getting ever more strict, prepare trains before starting a mission. There is a mod that will show you what cars belong to what job, but just simply eyeing out the yards is not too hard. Just remember that full rows amount to about 10 cars, and cargo is color-coded and appears just like they do in the diagrams. When looking at a station map, note the lines that do not have anything noted on them. This will entail that jobs will never be spawned on those lines. Usually lines are designated with L for loading will also be always empty. Using the dispatcher license will ensure this knowledge is helpful when planning out a job. Also remember not to leave a train stationary on a line where jobs can spawn, as that will cause conflict with the job generator. Intended for the late game due to its high price tag, demonstrator/museum trains will not have a running cost. At most, you will eventually get an admissions fee, but using the demonstrators is a good way of making/saving money. This alongside the manual service will save you a lot of money in the long run. Manual service alone halves the amount of money it takes to refuel and repair trains, versus just paying the railway. The other benefits of demonstrator trains is their ability to be spawned anywhere for a given fee and their inability to despawn. As with B99 with the slew of gadgets, the second part is pretty handy. My most commonly used gadgets will be the LED lights for cab visibility in both steam engines, the digital speedometer, and probably most crucial of all for the S282, the switch setter. I know to an extent I purposely left out a lot of information, but at the same time I still want a good chunk of people to be able to experience some things on their own. In the meantime, however, I shall be eagerly looking forward to the next update as I soon figure out how much harder it is to triple or quadruple head with the S282. I just need to assemble a train long enough to have that sort of power make sense.